All right, guys, welcome to my live. Brian Hardy is going to be joining us any moment. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different things, including adaptogens, plant medicines, and a lot of other biohacking tools. There you are. Hey, Brian. Dive right in. Hey, Katie. Hey, brother. How's things?
Things are great. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, I can see you and I can hear you.
Okay, my screen is all black, so I don't know what's going on there, but I can see you.
Okay.
So I'm
So
gonna
I've
try.
had that happen. If you go to your home screen without exiting Instagram and then pop back into Instagram, it usually activates your camera.
Ah,
So try to do
genius.
so. Awesome. Yeah, I've seen that a few times. I'm not sure exactly why it happens, but that's the easiest fix. Hey, Reva.
Hey, we got Reba, we got Katie. This is
Reva
fantastic.
was here on Sunday. I did 3 of these and I've been thoroughly enjoying them. So thank you for joining me.
Yeah, man. I'm excited. I'm excited. I haven't been doing many of these, which is kind of odd for me because I love connecting with people, but I've really also been enjoying the time to reflect and to be more inward. Um,
Hmm.
Sent the invitation, I knew it was an immediate yes. So
Cool. Yeah, so before we launch right into it, like I will say that what I know about you is that you address the human experience on all levels, which I really admire, and I appreciate that you look at the mental, the cognitive, the emotional, of course, the biological and the physical. And your page is such a good synthesis of many different tools and techniques for addressing some of the issues that people have. So before we get into all that, why don't you tell me briefly where you were at before all these interests and, maybe some of the transition into the life that you now live?
yeah, yeah, wow. Where I was at before. I mean, the becoming of who I am now and what I do now, what I'm interested in now, has been a process, as all things are, about 10 years in the making. But what really kicked it off was when I was 18 years old, my appendix ruptured and was misdiagnosed and nearly killed me and sent me into a probably 4-year recovery process to get my digestion back online. I was full of infection and afterwards, I was quite fatigued and my energy never rebounded, and just
Hmm.
had just issue after issue after issue, from different complications associated with that. And ever since then, and being really disappointed, really, with the professional medical opinion as to what I should do or as to what even caused that to happen, which they didn't have an explanation for. Uh,
Hmm.
so I didn't really, I couldn't live with that. I couldn't accept that. My mind has always been very curious and problem sort of solving focused, and I love to understand how things work and take things apart, put them back together. I was actually studying engineering technology at the time. And that was like my original, out of high school career trajectory, which we don't know anything coming out of high school, most of us. At least I'll
Yep.
speak for myself. I didn't know a whole lot. So, yeah, it was really that loss of health
Mm.
and crisis point that I was really blessed to have. Looking back, it's been the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. But so that point was really where everything started to shift. I became very attuned to the fact that my life would have an end, um,
Mm.
and so that had me start asking a lot of questions and really examining what am I doing, why am I doing it, um, how can I feel better again. And since then, it's been a pretty nonstop journey into what is sort of the recipe for human thriving, as well as sort of planetary thriving. I love learning about the soil and the trees and the ecosystem health, and how we are a direct reflection of our ecosystems.
Hmm.
Um, I try not to, put up false barriers between plant life, human life, fungal life, soil life, air quality, all these things, because it's all a blend.
Hmm.
Um, and each of us is a beautiful expression of that blending. And so, yeah, that's what it's been. It's been uh, just a focus on what makes us well, what prevents us from being well. How do we look at that nutritionally? Is and was my real first introduction, and my formal training is mostly around nutrition
Mm-hmm.
and like the holistic sense of that. And so these days, I find myself at the intersection more so of personal sovereignty and freedom and what that means, as well as taking a much deeper interest. And this is where we got to connect more around the men's health, right, and men's work,
Yeah.
being the deep need for that in myself, and the deep need in mass for men, to have places where they can be challenged and taught and supported and loved and encouraged and
Mm.
given direction. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't have a lot of really positive, strong, healthy direction growing up.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll just leave it there because I could talk on ad nauseum. I love to speak. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's how I end up here, more or
Cool.
less.
So would it be safe to say, or would it be fair to conclude that you were forced onto this journey by a fork in the road? Because, a ruptured appendix in the 4 years of it sounds like, pretty ill health caused this need to arise in your life.
Definitely, definitely. And it wasn't until I remember I was watching a bunch of YouTube videos to like try and find inspiration and information to feel better. And this one guy put it as, it's not your fault that your health is poor, but
Yeah.
you are responsible.
Yeah.
And that's really what woke me up from victim consciousness, right? And identifying as a victim and, oh, woe is me, and why did this happen? And oh, the doctor should have known better, and all that nonsense that just doesn't serve anything. It doesn't help me move forward and learn and grow. And so since then, it's been like, okay, I'm going to choose to make the most of this, and I'm going to
Hmm.
study people who have walked similar paths before me, and integrate and emulate and learn as much as I can. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, it was definitely a fork in the road and a choice to continue to suffer into perpetuity, which is just not my nature,
Hmm.
um, or to do something different, right? And sort of carve my own path.
Yeah, based on that context, it sounds like there's actually a lot of similarities and overlap between your story and mine, because however much it sounds like the ruptured appendix was mostly physical, most of my suffering arose within the mental, emotional. And, you know, my journey ended up devolving into heroin addiction and a lot of maladaptive coping strategies and behaviors. But I too came to a point where my options were to die, which was a realistic option that was on the table, or really come to life and a new life and a healthier, happier, more wholesome life. And I, much like you, started to take after like what is going on. Like what are beneath the layers of the apparent physical reality, and what's driving a lot of these inner workings and these behaviors that I didn't have answers for.
Mm, yeah, yeah, and one could even make the case that, and I know people do make the case that all physical manifestations have an emotional root in some capacity. And I think that that's true in my case. I do think that there were things at the time that I wasn't able to digest, metaphorically.
Hmm.
I certainly had a very disconnected relationship from my lower energy centers. Lots of sexual shame, lots of disownment of my sexuality. And so I have to believe that the combination of course, physical factors to sort of set the terrain, but also the combination of really not flowing and unhealthy energy, down below,
Hmm.
sort of third chakra being digestion, and sort of down below that, I have to believe that that was all interlinked.
Hmm.
There was no mistake that that's sort of where my particular weakness showed up.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really fascinating. The connection between the emotional and the physical realm is one that's pretty well undeniable. You could, of course, deny it, but like I know you and I are in the same page. So why don't we start with the physical? Are there any at all generalizations that you can make, or is it really entirely on a case by case basis? And let's speak specifically about diet, adaptogens, plant medicines. within the non-psychoactive realm. Let's talk about just the biological system first.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be outliers and sort of, hyper responders or non-responders, which would be the two ends of the spectrum, right? People who they can take anything and they barely feel anything, and then the people who take the tiniest amount of something, even coffee or chocolate or whatever, and they're like bouncing off the walls for days. And so, speaking generally to probably the 80 or so% of us that live somewhere in the middle. There are a lot of things that we can generalize, sleep and good quality sleep, hydration and good quality water to hydrate us. Those two things alone are often where I start with people, and they're often places where there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And there's a lot of factors and a lot of things that we can do, a lot of which are free, to get things moving back into a more regenerative, adaptive direction. Right? Because anytime that we're having dis-ease or symptoms of some sort, it's because we've usually hit the breaking point or hit the tipping point where our system can no longer maintain resilience to the stress. And so it starts to, it's always attempting to adapt, right? The body's always working for us. And that's something I always want to remind myself and remind anyone listening, is that your body is an amazing miracle that is always doing its best for you, like all the time. Right. And even as I say that, I notice my energy shift and lighten. And I know that to be true. And so when it can't, when it reaches its limit, which unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how we look at things, in the modern day, living in cities, there's so many things going against our body's natural ability to adapt that it's not uncommon that we have, symptoms or diseases or diagnoses or whatever the thing might come. Whatever health challenge might present itself. But yeah, starting with the basics, like making sure you're drinking enough water and making sure that you're drinking water that is, what I would call, worthy of your consumption. And I don't want to sound like a water elitist, although I could be perceived as one, because I will just refuse to drink low quality water if I have another option, or if I can just go a little bit of time. But I really do think that those things, we are made of water. We are mostly water. And the quality of our water is going to dictate the quality of our cellular communication, which is then going to filter out to our organs, into our organ systems, into our brains, into our hearts, and everything is interlinked with the quality of that water. So we want to be drinking as pure as possible, either distilled or reverse osmosis or some sort of other filtration. Structuring the water, which is something not a lot of people talk about, but which I believe is really quite important, which just kind of really just means attempting to mimic the vortexing nature that water goes through in springs or streams. How historically people have found the most life-giving, revitalizing water in springs and streams across the planet. And so there's different ways to do that, but I really do think that and people will talk about cellular memory and water having an immense capacity to hold memory. And so that's what we're talking about there. We talk about structure. It's really altering or cleansing the memory of the water. So yeah, those are basic things: sunshine, grounding, physical movement, a little bit of deep breathing. It's a lot of the real basic things that I'll start folks with that unfortunately we often overlook, right? And we want to reach directly to some fancy superfood powder or some, fancy hypnosis meditation retreat or something. Great things. I'm not against those things. But if I'm trying to be wise with my resources and get the most bang for my buck and build the most solid foundation, right, that's not going to crumble if stresses arise in the future, then I want to make sure that I'm focusing on what matters most and what I have most control over.
Yeah. I would absolutely agree. And you're right, 70% of us is water, and yet most all the efforts at improving my physical health have been reaching for a supplement, a pill, a powder, which I'm really working with at max, like 30 to 40% of what I'm comprised of. And then so like addressing water and the source of water, and I just switched to an alkaline water system and got my parents to switch as well, because I started to read a lot of evidence coming from Japan mostly, and showing the way in which alkaline water and pure, healthy, clean water can improve like every biological system that we contain. And then, even more important than water, we might suggest the breath. And we can't really do anything to clean the air, but we can start to at least take more oxygen, slow down our breathing, deepen our breathing, practice breath work and exercises to like really shift us on a deep energetic and cellular basis. Because we know we can go, I think the average quote is like 30 days without food, 3 days without water, but less than 3 minutes without air.
Yeah, yeah, it's foundational. It's foundational. I like that you brought that up. And it's an area that I neglected for a long time because, I mean, of course, well, not of course, these days you're more likely to have clean air around just because everything's been sort of ground to a standstill. But
Hmm.
those of us living in cities, even in a city, most times the air is going to be better outside than inside. So
Hmm.
opening windows, getting some natural access, going to a park, going to a forest, all that's going to be amazing. And, we can use specific plants even to clean our air.
Hmm.
And I know NASA, I think, published a list of the most effective plants for air cleaning
Oh,
because
wow.
they looked into it because of the space shuttle.
Hmm.
And so plants can clean the air. There are air filters, like a HEPA filter that can be really useful, particularly if you've got any sort of like off-gassing or toxic, new carpets or new couches or any of that stuff that can really, give off a lot of nasty stuff. So there are filters that will actually suck some of that stuff right out. But yeah, simple things like keeping plants around, things that are going to help clean the air.
Hmm.
Um, I like to use ozone sometimes to clean air, and you can do that with different types of ozone generators. Not to breathe in directly necessarily, but they can be fantastic for cleaning the air.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's like let's remember that, and I got this from Daniel Vitalis, who was a fantastic author, thinker, creator, health, enthusiast, hunter, gatherer, like a really amazing dude. And I got this from his framework, which is really about seeing humans, seeing ourselves as, a domesticated species.
Hmm.
And so how do we want to live? And do we want to be like free ranging, domesticated animals? Do we want to be, caged up, kind of animals? And what kind of ecosystem, what kind of environmental conditions do we know that we need in order to get the most out of this experience? Uh,
Hmm.
we would in the zoo, or the same way we would with a pet, right? A lot of people put way more time and attention and money into their pet's health than their own health. To me, is absolute insanity.
Right.
Uh, but I can see how one could come to that place, right?
Mm.
Um, so it's really interesting, and we live in such strange times where the healthy thing is usually the complete opposite to the mainstream thing.
Mhm.
Um, Changing, that's always changing, and rather rapidly these days it seems. Um, but more often than not, it's an uphill battle.
Mhm.
If you're living in a city, you're going to be fighting a bit of an uphill battle, swimming against the current, you might say, to really start turning things around and optimizing the conditions in your own, physiological environment.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And why don't we transition into like from biological into sexual health? Because I know that's something that you've posted about a handful of times, and I really appreciate that you're touching on this topic. And most of the conversations that I have are with women, and it seems like in my experience, which of course is biased, the women have been taking a hold of and control of their sexual health for quite some time. But this is something that's still pretty new to me and new to most of the men in my community. So share whatever first thoughts are coming up around sexual health.
Yeah, well, first of all, just for anyone listening who might still be really burdened by shame and guilt, um, that I feel for you, and that I've been in those places, and I spent, the better part of 20 years, probably the first 20 years of my life, in a place like that. Um, and I really don't see how health can arise from that, again, that foundation, right? There
Hmm.
needs to be some inner work and some excavating, right? Or as I like to say, exercising of some demons that might have accumulated, some
Yeah.
dust in the closets or whatever analogy people like. But aside from that, which is the biggest side because that I think is a huge piece. Aside from that, oh man, I mean, I'll just put it like this. I discovered what I would call a more true path to sexual health through tantric yoga. And I was about probably 19 or 20 years old when I realized that was a thing. I was already into hatha yoga, more for physical and mental, health benefits. And I discovered this whole other world that touched on and went very in depth into sexuality and energy dynamics and breathwork practices and semen retention and all these different things. Really what I saw it as was, oh, these people have a manual that's thousands of years old that I can learn from and improve myself in that capacity, right? I can become a better lover, essentially, both for myself and for a partner. And that really was a huge awakening moment, and helped me to really continue to break down and identify the really unhealthy belief patterns and structures that I had been programmed with in my upbringing, right? And I was raised in quite a conservative Christian upbringing, which had a lot of benefits and it had its drawbacks. And yeah, so that was really, that helped me to give myself permission to feel good about sexuality and to love my sexuality and to love my body in a different way, a more complete way. And to really that transferred to being able to love women in a better way. Be, to just be more present with them when I was with them or when I am with them. I've been with a partner for 2 years now, so that's been a very consistent, container for me. But it's something that I think, unfortunately, it's like many things, it's become very degenerated. And I will say, because this I think ties quite perfectly into it and is another Dana Vitalis idea of awakening moment. And not to get too off onto a tangent, but when it comes to circumcision, Dana Vitalis had an article that was amazing. And he said, basically, if we want less insensitive dickheads, i.e., stupid macho dudes or whatever derogatory term you want to put onto a guy who's just like full of testosterone, doesn't know how to deal with it, and probably doesn't communicate very well, an insensitive dickhead, probably been labeled. If we want less of them, then we need to stop creating insensitive dickheads through the process of circumcision. And that has never left me. That has never left me. And I think it's exactly that. It is that clear and that simple, that circumcising a baby boy who has just come into the world and is super impressionable, and now you're going to go and, violently cut this most sensitive part of his manhood, literally cut it off. That can't have good effects down the line. It just can't. And I had a very interesting experience to this whole thing because I luckily was not circumcised. So I'm still intact. Thank God my mother was not willing to subject her baby boy to such a process. But I had the opposite. I had shame around being intact because a lot of my guy friends growing up were circumcised. So it's this really weird backward psychology where I'm the one who's got the natural thing going on that's more pleasurable and more functional, and my friends have the opposite. But porn is all fucked up because it's mostly all circumcised dudes. And health class, I think they even showed, I don't even know if they even talked about foreskin in health class that much. I don't know. Either way, all that layered on to whatever programming I had going on. And I think a lot of dudes, whether they know it or not, if they are circumcised and were circumcised as babies, there could be something there for them in terms of recognizing their own patterning or conditioning or relation to the physical, to their own body. So yeah, it's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's something that I want to see talked about more. I want to see, really put into the light as a barbaric and unnecessary thing that a lot of people just think, oh, it's no big deal. So yeah, that's that I think, especially for men, ties into a lot when it comes to sexual health. But for me, it was a lot of those things. It was that merging of things, and then like I said, Tantra gave me sort of the guidebook, and I love learning and I love understanding And so I know I've never taken a super deep dive into it, but I've taken enough of a deep dive, and I've taken some really just useful practices that have allowed me to understand sexual energy, understand sexual polarity, understand how to build that up, how to charge that up, how to become more magnetic for whatever it is, a partner, a job, money, whatever it is, using that energy to our advantage, right? Rather than leaking it out. Because like I said, probably the first 18 years of my life, although obviously I wasn't masturbating as a little baby. But from ages, I don't know, puberty, whenever puberty starts, until sometime after my appendix thing, so 18, there's probably a solid like 6 or 7 years where I was consistently draining my life force with porn.
Yeah.
And it's not good for anyone. That's just not good for anyone. And it's no wonder we have an epidemic of, depression and loneliness and inability for guys to connect. Because of the epidemic of internet porn and what that does to the psyche and to the heart. It's a deep issue, but
Hmm.
I miss if I didn't at least bring that into the conversation and put that on the table for uh, for people to consider, especially the men that might be tuning into this.
Yeah, yeah, I really appreciate that you brought forth those topics because those are things that I've started to talk about. However much my realizations, it seems like the same realizations that you were having at 17, 18, I started having at 27, 28. So, be it the way my life unfolded, there was just a decade more of that, which I've now learned is wounding and patterning that I have to heal and decondition. And it's such an uphill battle, but at the same time it's so clear what you're saying about like these incidences being exposed to like pornography or circumcisions are traumatic for like infants, kids, adolescents, young men. And I do think that many, if not most, or even all of the issues can at least in part be traced to repressed sexual desire because now we see the modern world and the standard being like hitting on, approaching, and catcalling, at least on some degree, women, and our trauma is placed on women, right? And I'm normalizing and generalizing in heterosexual situations. So for anyone tuning in, feel free to position yourself wherever you within whatever spectrum you subscribe to. But I think the stats are clear that most of the traumas that women experience are at the hands of men, and most of the traumas that men have experienced happened, at some point in their past by other men. So the onus is, like I'll go ahead and say for the record, mostly on the men today to begin to heal these wounds and these traumas that are just otherwise getting perpetrated continuously and cycling again and again.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And like you said at the beginning of this, um, a lot of the women, for I guess out of necessity, right, coming from the times that we came from with more repression and lack of just choices and lack of opportunity, I think that drove sort of an underground movement. And women just tend to be better communicators and better at forging and nourishing social networks than men. At least most women seem to be that way. I think that it's due to neurological wiring and hormonal patterns and various things. But so women's circles and women's groups and, women having a support network of the girlfriends or the people in their lives that they can reach out to, that they have these conversations with, they're probably decades ahead, right? On at least on again, general terms. Um, and so, yeah, it is very, very important that men recognize that, not only do we not have to do it by ourselves, but I don't think we can do it by ourselves. And even if we could, it wouldn't be very enjoyable. So just let go of that program, let that die and recognize that it's not a sign of weakness to need support, right? We are a social creature. We thrive in groups, and men traditionally have thrived in, what you might call brotherhoods, which doesn't have to be your blood brothers, but it means a group of guys that you would get together with, you would build things with, you would go hunt with, you might fish with, you might make decisions about important things. You might witness important events. You might train physically together and really push each other to become sharper and stronger. All of these things that are still somewhat intact in hunter-gatherer groups, but which are mostly either completely gone or they have been sort of that same energy has been channeled into a different activity, so like maybe sports has become the new hunting,
Mm.
or, business has become the new tribal council, or, something
Yeah.
like that. And so I think it's really important that not only do we forge those connections, but find those sources of nourishment and support that you can tap into, um, but also to, um, oh, I lost my train of thought, to find those sources and to, there was something else there. It's eluding me right now. But yeah, just to recognize that if you're going to thrive in your life, that there's going to be, um, well, I guess it's coming to terms with, the current state of ourselves and the world,
Yeah.
contrasting that to whatever best examples we have of more healthy and thriving communities and thriving examples of human beings, and then seeing how can we sort of fulfill the same innate requirements, I might
Hmm.
say. It's like the same, it's why I think, picking a berry off a bush and eating it is such a satisfying act. And I think it is to any human that has the courage to do so. And it's crazy that you even need to have courage to do something like that these days. But a lot of people will look at you like you're crazy. Like if you're picking berries off a tree, and clearly you want to know the berry or the fruit or whatever
Yeah.
it is you're eating.
Yeah.
But some people will look at you like you're crazy if you're eating wild food. And it's like, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't be here if our ancestors didn't eat these things.
Right.
Uh, and let alone, they're better than anything you're going to find in a grocery store.
Mm.
Again, it's coming to grips with the fact that we are a domesticated species. We live in a very unnatural, in many cases, hostile and toxic environment.
Mm.
And then, just accepting that, owning it, and then taking, day by day, small step to change it, to make it better in whatever way we can, and really to see what works for us, right? Because the body, mind, I speak to them as if they are one thing, which I believe they are, one continuous sort of thing. Um, it doesn't lie, and
Yeah.
that can be taken into different ways. But when you get a sense in your body, like a rush of vital energy, that's a sign, right? It's
Mm.
like jumping in a cold river. That's a sign to you as to, oh, this is something I can do that makes me feel more alive than probably almost anything in my life.
Right.
And sometimes we need things like that to shake us up, right? That's what a health crisis can serve as, or your girlfriend breaking up with you, or your doctor giving you a diagnosis, or whatever the thing, losing a job. In this climate currently, losing a job is probably a pretty common occurrence, an experience that a lot of people have had. So it's like, how do we find those pattern interrupts to shake things up, to recognize, we're here, we're in a crazy world, things are changing real fast,
Hmm.
and we can influence them in whatever direction we so choose.
Yeah. Roshan and Yusuf and Jen are all still with us. So I'm just going to give like a brief update on where we're at right now in our conversation. And I love that. And I knew that we'd move into talking about men's work and the importance of brotherhood today. And Roshan's been to a couple of the circles that I was facilitating prior to the pandemic too. So I know he'll appreciate the importance of having a brotherhood. And I love that you brought up the fact that up until recently in society, we did everything together in tribes or groups or councils or whatever the case may be. And I do think that the individualization of individuals coincides with a lot of the problems, a lot of the modern day neuroses that we have as a result of like trying to stand out and trying to be different and trying to be so incredibly unique. Because we don't have to go far back in time at all to look at, apes and chimpanzees and our common ancestors and look at the importance of having a tribe and a family and a group, right?
Mm.
And and then you're talking about the fact that yeah, if I go and I know I've got a blueberry bush out front of my house, or I know it's a strawberry, if I go and pick that and eat it, there are a handful of people that are going to think that it's dirty, it's unsanitary, it's uncivilized. And Osho writes a lot about in several of his books about the fact that the civilization of society is again causing so much pain and so much struggle because we've lost our primal nature and we've completely alienated and repressed the deep animalistic drives that are the reason that humans got to how far we did. And this is now bringing in, you know, sexuality and sex and the desire for that being deeply primal, being something that I don't think we have any business trying to transcend or annihilate or remove, because it's really removing by and large, like emotionally, such a big part of our experience, and even neurologically at the very core of our limbic system, right at the very center of our brain. So the it looks like it paused there for a moment. You still hear me?
It had like maybe 10 seconds. Said removing by and large, and then it.
Yeah, removing by and large this like emotional part and like cognitive spiritual part of ourselves, which is like the sex and sexuality and the primal nature, but it's also at the core of our brain, like the limbic system, which I know you know at least enough about, drives a lot of the behavior. So like taking that and working with it and understanding it is so important, and it's produced so much healing in my life. And then getting back to our primal roots, right? And I'm not saying that, you know, I'm never going to shower again. I'm never going to eat using a fork and knife. But I am saying to at least experience, like you're suggesting, some of those older or more ancient ways of living.
Yeah, and I think anyone who's afforded themselves or been, you know, blessed with the opportunity to do so, knows deep in their bones that that is a much more satisfying way to be. Maybe not
Mm.
all the time. You know, maybe you don't want to be cooking your food on a campfire all the time because that
But
can
once
get.
in a while.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you that sense of being connected, and really, what it is, I think, is having connection, right? Connection to the elements,
Mm.
working with the elements, connection to other people, connection to the earth, connection to your food source. Is that connection which breathes and nourishes life? And I think so, like you said, so much of the challenge that has come with civilization and quote unquote safety, which we're hearing a lot about these days, is the disconnection from that which actually created, you know, the conditions for vital living,
Hmm.
which nourishes our cells and our minds and our spirits and keeps us sharp and keeps us strong and keeps us, you know, from getting too lazy or too overweight or too whatever the thing might be, you know, not to like fat shame or any of those things.
Sure.
Um, but there's a very clear, from what I can tell, toxicity of comfort.
Mm.
And it's never come to me in those terms, but I think I'm going to have to expound on that a little bit in future sharing and content, because comfort does become toxic when you have too much of it. And it's dangerous to be too comfortable.
Hmm.
And although our fragile meat suits crave it, because we know what the opposite can be like when we're in intense pain, or if we're hungry, or we're really thirsty, or we're sleep deprived, all you want is reprieve from that distress, because that's how you're going to survive, right? That's your survival instinct kicking in. But we can't let that linger when we live in a world, at least in the areas that we live in, you know, talking about Ontario, Canada in the year 2020. Um, we can't let that drive, like you said, drive our decisions. And it will to some degree because it's unconscious mostly. But we don't want that to be in the driver's seat when it comes to choosing decisions on how to live and how to spend our time and, um, you know, where to invest our energy, because oftentimes we will choose the easiest, most simplest, less stressful thing. And then we become soft and disconnected. So it's walking that balance, right? Knowing when to go without and then when to indulge, which mirrors perfectly with tantric philosophy in many ways, because, you know, a lot of ways of practicing can be sort of periods of fasting, and that's
Mm.
fasting from stimulation of all kinds, right? Exotic foods, flavorful foods, sexual activity, all those things. And then
Mm.
indulgence, where you're sort of swinging between the two sides of the pendulum, and building a appreciation and an understanding that's far deeper because of that exploration. Uh,
Mm.
yeah,
Cool. Yeah, I love that term, the toxicity of comfort. I've never conceptualized it that way either, but I also definitely appreciate and believe that I know what you're referring to. And it is an awareness of balance, right? Like I'm not going to be one to start advocating to throw your bed out the window and stop showering and never brush your teeth again, because these are modern comforts, right? There is a balance, and I do think that we can take a lot of the tools and like techniques and modern inventions that we have as modern day humans, but also respect and acknowledge that brief, intermittent, and relatively mild to moderate experiences that are uncomfortable are really good for the long game, right? They're really advantageous and really helpful when it comes to setting up, optimal health. And
Mm.
I can see Roshan's asking in the comments, and I think he tuned in after we segued from our discussion on pornography. But one way to look at it is that like when I feel that desire for an immediate release, it's a discomfort, right? Like when I feel the surge of sexual desire, my initial reaction is how do I get rid of this? How do I get back to comfort? And today, my practice is to hold space for it, sit with it, and move it and breathe. And I know that, like you know quite well, a lot of the tantric practice is available to circulate the energy around and hold space for a little bit of discomfort. But if you wanted to comment more on that, either the practices specifically to sit with discomfort, or if you want to address Roshan's question on pornography, feel free.
Yeah, well, I would just say in terms of pornography, I think it's incredibly damaging for the most part, and particularly for the adolescent mind, and that it does not represent, real healthy intimacy in most cases. I know there's different genres that might strive towards something that's a lot more authentic and intimate. But I think on the whole, it's quite toxic and damaging and best to be avoided. Um, and again, that comes from many years of being, addicted to it. Um, and so I would congratulate you for giving it up 2 months ago and just keep that up. And you're probably going to find that everything in your life gets better. And but it ties into this other piece, right? Because if you just cut it off, and it's like most addictions, right? If you just cut something off but don't replace it with something,
Yeah.
then it can lead to a buildup or a stagnation or an opportunity where that energy is going to latch onto the next thing, right? Or the next whatever it might be, perceived outlet. And so you want to be aware of how you're feeling having given it up, and how you're able to relate to your body differently, and how you're able to slow down and, like we said, practice some of the breathing, practice the what I call riding the wave, or you could call it being multi-orgasmic or whatever you want to frame it as, but building up to that like 7 out of 10 level where 10 is the point of no return, and learning to breathe the energy up and relax deeply and sort of just let it circulate and feel it circulate. And that might sound quite out there at first, as people aren't acquainted with the more energetic subtleties of their bodies. But I do think we can all develop that capacity, and to not give up if right at first you're like, oh, I don't feel anything, or oh, this is stupid, or oh, this is hard, because your mind will probably come up with all those things and more. And so just to be ready for that, and to uh, yeah, to really honor your creativity, because I think that the sexual force, the creative force, they are they're linked. They're the same thing in so many ways, and so channel that into something that is ideally joy providing or joy giving, and is going to enrich your experience of really your human experience, right? Your body and your mind, and enrich your ability to appreciate and to understand and to um, have mastery over.
Hmm.
Because the more, like, and this goes for everything, right? The more we are able to observe, understand, hold in compassion, and still yet be in the driver's seat to a degree, And I'm not one to believe that you create your entire reality and you are the omnipresent divine being who, like, I don't buy into that story. So I think a lot of what we experience in life is by grace, um, and we can certainly influence and drive in a certain direction to a large degree. And so one might call that mastery, right? Mastery over your drives, or mastery over your bodily desires, bodily functions, even. And
Hmm.
I think it's wise to pursue that level of experience and connection to your own system, because you're going to be in this body for hopefully, I'm aiming for at least 100 years. I don't know what most.
Would be nice.
And you know, I'm just of the opinion that we might as well make the most. We're here. We woke up to life on planet Earth. It's freaking amazing in so many ways, and challenging and heartbreaking in so many ways. And yet, I'm an eternal optimist, and I think it's my astrology, it's my life experience, it's my relatively ideal and stable upbringing with both parents in the home. It's so many things that made me who I am in this life that I get to live. But I just can't stop seeing the silver lining in things. I just can't, and I won't. So, that was kind of a running on answer there, but I trust that some nuggets of gold were hopefully planted or unearthed in that.
Yeah, I wanted to refer specifically to the way in which you touched on creatorhood, and I do know that you believe, at least in part, on the metaphysical reality and the importance of like clearing away emotional obstructions and blocks, be it like conditioned or energetic or otherwise, that we have against like relationships and abundance and like finances and a lot of the classical struggles that a lot of people fall into. But what I've learned quite recently in my experience is that the spiritual realm is littered with paradoxes. There are these dichotomies that seem mutually exclusive. And I fully and wholeheartedly believe that today, anyone, and myself, I can hold the experience I have in pure acceptance and like absolute contentment, and like you hear things like, oh, you're at wherever you need to be and everything is perfect the way it is, while also desiring a different future outcome or an ideal future outcome, right? Or an intended kind of future experience. Because I have a lot of experience deeply hating the present moment and chasing some sort of other reality because I'm just not content. And then I also have a little bit of experience just coasting, being entirely complacent, being like, well, I just don't care what happens because the now is all there is. So I truly believe that it takes a certain level of awareness and consciousness to hold these paradoxes, these different understandings at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. And again, that's where, having good teachers and good, resources, books, mentors, whatever it might be, people that can help guide us, and help to illuminate those things and to help us to remember and to recognize that that's part of the journey. Right? It's a normal part of the journey. Um, and in that way to not resist it, right? And to see how can I find peace within the unknown. I know for myself, and having a very intellectual mind, that is constantly, pretty much, unless I'm really on top of it, it's constantly, grasping for certainty. And if I just know this thing, if I just read this book, if I just listen to this podcast, then I'll be at peace, and then everything will be fine with the world. Um, and it's not true, right? Sure, we have breakthroughs and we have ahas and we have moments where pieces come together and make a more symbiotic whole that that enhances our understanding. But it's a never-ending process, right? There's always going to be more. And so I love how you said that, being able to hold those two things, which is so important. It's so, so important because, like we said, there's a lot of things in the spiritual journey, and I think just a lot of things in, creation itself, which, I would argue at its very essence is a spiritual, outpouring into physicality. That the whole thing is a paradox, right? It's like from nothing became everything, and then the dark and the light, and the night and the day, and it's just like the whole thing is a paradox and filled with duality. Um, and yeah, and it created and has created the perfect training ground, aka planet Earth, for souls to come down here and to experience all that duality and to learn to understand or learn to transcend these seeming limitations
Mm-hmm.
of some of that dualistic thinking and dualistic perception.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there seems to be very clear examples of souls that have walked that path and shared that to thousands and millions of people around the planet.
Yeah.
Um, that's where a lot of the major traditions come from. And so there's
Mm-hmm.
certain ways that we can study that material and study those teachers and study those examples of what it can be like to be. And this is probably one of my favorite Christ quotes, and that's to be in the world but not of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I think most of us, all of us, if you're a monk, which would be sort of escaping the world, which I had a small period of time where I thought that was, the path to enlightenment that was destined for me. It was very clearly not, and I don't think it is for most of us. But having said that, it's that being in and surrounded by and part of the systems of the world, and yet to not be to not identify. That's how I take the quote, at least to not identify and become like rigidly fixated upon or within said systems. Um, and just drawing that to today, and where I see on a global level, a lot of the systems are breaking down, transforming, being questioned, being rethought, re-engineered. There's all kinds of really cool little experiments going on in, say, like the permaculture world or community living worlds, and just designing a better way forward. I think all of us, or most of us, would agree is it's high time that we did that. And so we're getting to see also, the paradox of birth and death. And right now, it feels like with what's been going on globally, that we're seeing the death of something and the birthing of another thing. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of us are experiencing that in a very intimate way, both emotionally, mentally, spiritually. What is, if we just have eyes to see what that is, and then hopefully we can find some peace within the never-ending paradoxes that we're, sure to encounter.
Yeah. And that's what I really love and I really appreciate about Tantra, which is this understanding that, like, Tantra doesn't have a preference. It doesn't say masculine is better than feminine. It doesn't say pleasure is somehow more virtuous than pain. It doesn't even say that being alive is better than being dead. They're just different experiences. And our society likes to put preferences. We like to say that this experience is somehow automatically and universally better than this other experience. And we talk about death as if it was a complete tragedy, right? And it's one thing to be 88 and pass away from natural causes, and it's another thing to be 60, which is too young, and it's another thing to be 40, which is an atrocity, and then 20 is just unspeakable. And if you're a child, it's the end of the world. But like really looking at it from the context of Tantra and looking at it as like a soul's mission to be expressed in whatever way, there's beauty and there is that silver lining that you see in literally every moment. Trouble is sometimes it takes quite a bit of time to begin to see the bigger picture because I'm acutely aware that any one of us have a very limited first person perspective of the world that we're interacting with. And we like to jump and we like to assume that something is inherently good or inherently bad because it makes me feel some way. And, just like you, and kind of coming back to the first thing that we talked about, and I don't know the words you used about the ruptured appendix in the 4 years, but you did say that there was teachings and blessings and miracles within there. And today, when I share with someone about my past as a heroin addict, my past experiences, and having been like in ICU and having been on life support and experienced kidney failure, a lot of the initial reaction is like, I'm sorry. And that's so unfortunate and that's so awful. But honestly, today, those moments were the biggest miracles and the best teachers that I've ever experienced. And the way in which I have healed today, and my mom and my dad and my sister and my close friends and my family have healed as a result of my healing is miraculous.
Yeah, yeah, aho. Yeah, it's so often the case. right? It's so often the case that those deepest challenges and pains and, breakdown moments are the fertile soil
Mm,
for the, growth in a new direction. Because I would have to say I've had almost, in a different form, but almost identical in that my loss of health stimulated health consciousness in myself and those closest to me. And, it's only when we lose something that we tend to really value it. Um, and so, whatever it is that someone might be going through or fixated around the loss of,
yeah.
um, it's a huge indicator as to, okay, what's going on, what is sort of nagging at you, or what is driving this behavior, or perhaps it's sort of repetitive thought patterns,
Mm,
rumination, a lot of the things that are associated with depression type symptoms, or depressive experiences, which again are at like epidemic levels these days.
yeah.
um, that for me is a great place for people to start to examine, right, and start to really get clear about. um, and it's just so useful. And again, in this world of like, technology and touchscreens and all the great things that that brings, um, there's something so therapeutic about writing with your hand in a pad of paper or a pen and just pouring it onto the page. Um, and yeah, I think on the whole, I know for myself, I am a lot calmer and saner when I'm doing that regularly.
Yeah.
It's funny because it'll often be I will neglect to do that regularly until the point where I'm like backed up. I'm like, journaling. I've become like constipated in my journaling habit. I'm just like compelled to like get on my bike, ride to a park, sit under a tree, and write for like 2 hours straight,
Yeah.
and then breathe like a huge sigh of relief. They're like, oh, why did it take me so long to do this? Uh,
Mm,
so I don't know if that's hopefully that's useful for some people listening. Maybe they just need to sit
yeah.
down and do some journaling and just get clear, let it flow, let it flow, and to not judge it and to not, like you said, have to make it right or wrong or good or bad, but
Mm,
just, be.
yeah. This jumps back a few moments, but I thought like around how I'll say you coined the term that comfort is toxic, or the toxicity of comfort. Certainty, or trying to make things certain, is also, I believe, a toxic behavior that a lot of people engage in entirely subconsciously. But yeah, we only have about like I think 30, 40 seconds left, and then it's going to give me a timer and it's going to shut us down. But I wanted to thank you for the time that you spent with us, and if there's anything else you wanted to share, if you want to go ahead and do that now, you're welcome to.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and exploration, and I'm going to have to go back and listen to some of this because it brought up a lot of things that I, haven't put out into the world in a really clear and concise way. So thank you for, the invitation and creating the space. And then, yeah, for people that are watching, if you've enjoyed this, if you're vibing with what we've been putting out, and or you're struggling, right? You're struggling with your health, your energy, your digestion, your feeling of sort of vital essence, and I'm particularly speaking to men on that regard, to feel free to reach out. Shoot me a DM, connect, comment on something, just start the conversation. I am here. I love to engage with other guys on their journeys, and offer whatever support I might be able to offer. Whether that's a few messages back and forth, or whether that's working together in a more structured and ongoing fashion. There's lots of options, and again, like we said earlier, there is support, right? There is support, and we all need it, myself included.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I just want to put that out there to anyone who's listening, um, and to encourage people to really enjoy this spring and summer weather,
mm,
particularly if they've been locked inside and away from the weather and away from the sun, to really cherish that and to know that that is your right as a human being, is to have connection to that which keeps you healthy and gives you life, um, and to not forget that.
awesome. Thanks, Brian. Thank you so much. We'll be in touch soon.
I,
I'm going to save this to my IGTV and I'll tag you in it so it's available. And then you can send it to anyone or tag anyone with it. So enjoy your
yeah,
day.
thank you. You too. Ciao.